Lecture for the First Sunday in Lent by Parry Liddon. The Idea of Religion. Psalm 143 verse 8. Show thou me the way that I should walk in, for I lift up my soul unto thee. Our age, it has been said, longs to be religious. If this is too unguarded an assertion, it is at least true that the instinct or sentiment of religion is treated among us with more respect and sympathy than has been the case at some past epochs of our national history. Amid the debaucheries of the Restoration and the shallow habits of thought on the gravest subjects which marked portions of the last century, religion in the broad sense of the term was largely discredited, even when it was not openly scouted as a weakness or a superstition. Whereas in our day, religion is named, even by the irreligious, with the forms, if not with the sincerity, of respect. And some men interest themselves in religion as an abstract good, with very great sincerity, who oppose by turns all that asserts its power and presence in the world. Thus they declaim against churches, while they explain that in doing this they are befriending that true religion which churches misrepresent. Or they would do away with priesthoods. But then they are only anxious, while rescuing the fair jewel of religion from clerical keeping, to make its sway more imperial, by making its mien and countenance more human. Or they make war upon theology, the theology of apostles, fathers, creeds. But theology, they declare again and again, is a pedantic product of the clerical understanding, and they, for their part, are passionately interested on behalf of the religion of the human heart. They discredit book revelations and insist upon errors of fact or errors of morals which they hold to be discoverable in the Bible. But they are all the more eager to profess and feel a zeal for that unerring and sublime essence of religion, which is not bound, as they phrase it, to the letter, and which fires their enthusiasm in renouncing the letter. And thus, however warmly the institutions, the ministers, the beliefs, the sacred literature of religion may be successively assailed, religion itself, we are assured, is respected. Or rather, it is respect for and loyalty to religion divested of accretions which have gathered round it and obscured its beauty during the lapse of time, which is in fact the animating motive of this most friendly and discriminating opposition. That religion should be thus safeguarded as an idea, when all that secures its practical power is by turns objected to, that the abstract, disembodied, intangible essence should be so sedulously honoured, while its concrete forms, its living and working embodiments, are opposed and denounced, is a fact which must engage attention. How are we to account for it? Is it that we live in a period of transition, when men have not yet faced the last consequences of the principles which they are adopting, and hang with a pardonable, although illogical, tenderness between premise and conclusion? Does the sacred name of religion still command an awe which, while it is not strong enough to protect many practical interests, can yet hedge around a remote object with the forms of popular respect? Is it that, as of old, barbarian invaders, who will without scruple devastate the precincts and sack the interior of the temple, are pausing involuntarily, spellbound, almost terrified, upon the threshold of the sacred shrine? Or does the aesthetic feeling of our time, looking at man's life with the eye of an artist rather than with the eye of a statesman or philanthropist, prompt this interest on behalf of religion as alone adequately representing and upholding the ideal side of human enterprise? Does it anticipate, not without reason, the dull, barren, uninteresting, prosaic level of existence to which we should be reduced if all that points upward in thought and feeling could be utterly stripped from us and eliminated? If human life could be robbed of the most refining and stimulating influences that can be brought to bear in it? Or is this reserve of interest on behalf of religion at bottom a social or political, if you like, a selfish class instinct? Is it order cowering before approaching revolution and endeavouring to support its regiments and its policemen with forces summoned from some higher world, whether of fact or fancy, with invisible powers capable of making their way into the very heart of the enemy's camp? Is it that we of this generation, who have read in the annals of a neighbouring country the stern lessons taught by 80 years of active or suppressed anarchy, are more keenly alive than were our ancestors to the tremendous force of the volcanic passions latent in human nature? Are we willing to grant that some religion at least is a social necessity, a necessity in the sense of Machiavelli, if not in the sense of Jesus Christ? Are we satisfied that the brute within us, if he is to be chained and imprisoned at all, can only be taken captive by a superhuman master, and will never forfeit his destructive liberty except at the bidding of an unearthly creed? Undoubtedly, it may be admitted that religion owes something on the score of respect yielded to her as an abstract idea to each of these causes. The awe which a reasoned skepticism cannot always crush, the perception of what it is that constitutes beauty in life, combined with the stern practical instincts of social safety, with the love of order, and the anxiety to make property and life secure, to insist that man must have something in the way of a religion. Schemes of independent morality, even if they were theoretically defensible, are not equal to resisting the impetuosities of passion or the exorbitant demands of a low self-interest. "Take my word for it," said a great statesman, "it is not prudent as a rule to trust yourself to any man who tells you that he does not believe in a God or in a future after death." But a deeper reason for the fact we are considering is to be found in the wider conviction that religion is, if I may so express it, an indispensable part of man's moral and mental outfit. Two causes have contributed to deepen this conviction in modern times. The first is the subjective spirit of the age, which insists on looking at truth not as it is in itself, in its utter independence of the mind of man, but as it presents itself to man's mind, or rather as man's mind in varying moods apprehends it. This spirit, while it has weakened the public hold upon creeds and scriptures, has directed attention with an intensity unknown before our day to the needs of the human mind, and among them to its supreme need of a religion. It has indeed exaggerated this into maintaining, as with Feuerbach, that all existing religions are but the creations of human thought, which, while it is really doomed to an uninterrupted contact with the world of sense, aspires to create, if it cannot discover, an ideal world beyond. But this paradox only yields an additional testimony to the need we have as men of some religion in order to do justice to our humanity. Religion, says a modern English writer, who certainly will not be suspected of any desire to exaggerate its influence, is that which gives to man in the midst of the rest of creation his special elevation and dignity. And it was perhaps upon the whole the most marked feature in the work of Schleiermacher that when groping his way back from the grim intellectual desert into which many of his countrymen had been led under the guidance of the older rationalism, he insisted with such emphasis and success upon the necessity of religion in order to the completion of human life. Beyond any of his contemporaries, he saw and pointed out that by our capacity for religion, by our power of looking beyond this deceptive and passing world of sense to a higher world, invisible and eternal, by loyalty to the obligations which that clearer sight imposes on us, we men are best distinguished from the brutes around us. Language itself, the physical dress in which we clothe our thought, is not more distinctly royal among our outward human prerogatives than that upturned countenance which, as the heathen poet divined, is a symbol of our intelligent capacity for a higher life. The indispensableness of religion to human life has also been forced on the mind of this generation by a deeper study of history. The more we know of the annals of our race, the more clearly is it seen how the greatest catastrophes and the most profound and far-reaching changes have really turned upon religious questions, and that the stronger and more definite has been the religion, the more fundamental and striking have been these results. Thus, for instance, the modern history of Europe has been little else than a history of struggles fundamentally religious. A recent historian of civilization has indeed maintained that this is true only of the past, and that the present age has more and more learned to restrict its enthusiasm to material objects. But he forgets that religion does not cease to influence events among those who reject its claims. It excites the strongest human passions, not merely in its defenders, but in its enemies. The claim to hold communion with an unseen world irritates when it does not win and satisfy. Atheism has again and again been a fanaticism. It has been a missionary and a persecutor by turns. It is lashed into passion by the very presence of the sublime passion to which it is opposed. We of today know full well that no political subjects are discussed so warmly as those which bear even remotely upon religion. The deepest subject, says Goethe, in the history of the world and of mankind, and that to which all others are subordinate, is the conflict between faith and unbelief. While these causes make an interest in religion of whatever kind inevitable among thoughtful men in our day and generation, they only reinforce, they do not obscure or supersede, those permanent reasons for its influence, which are part of our natural and human circumstances. Among those, it may suffice to mention one. It is a fact certain to each one of us that we shall individually die. If science could arrest the empire of death, as it has limited that of disease, if thought in its outward march throughout the centuries could rob us utterly of the presentiment of an immortality and of our aspirations towards a higher world, then religion would retain, in the fixed circumstances of life, no ally of anything like equal power. But there is the certainty present to each one of us in our thoughtful moments, never entirely absent from the thought of those who seriously think at all, that an hour will come when we shall face the problem of problems for ourselves and alone, when we shall know by experience what really is beyond the veil, and how it is related to that which we see and are here. And it is impossible with this prospect before us to treat the voice and claims of religion as wholly trivial or unimportant. But here the question arises as to what it is that man seeks in seeking religion, or rather, what is religion? We know it when we meet it in life. We know it by its bearing, by its fruits, by the atmosphere with which it surrounds itself. But what is it within the soul? What is its chief element or substance? What is this power which does not meet the eye, but which we trace in its results? What is the true psychological account that must be given of it? And we repeat the question, what is religion? We find ourselves, it may be, in the position of standing face to face with a very old acquaintance with whose countenance and habits we have been familiar all our lives, but of whose real self we cannot but feel we have a somewhat shadowy perception. Is religion then in the heart of man to be looked upon chiefly as the highest and purest form of feeling? Is feeling the essential thing in true religion? So thought no less a person than Schleiermacher. He makes religion to consist in feeling, notably in our feeling of dependence on a higher power. And his influence has won for this representation a wide acceptance in modern Protestant Germany. Such in England is, or has been at times, the practical instinct, if not the decision, of Wesleyanism and kindred systems. Feeling, not knowledge, feeling, not morality, feeling, not even conscience, is a test of acceptance, that is to say, of satisfactory religion. Acceptance is warranted by the sense of acceptance. Religious progress is measured by the sense of enjoying more and more the raptures of the religious life. Now, if we look either into the recesses of the human heart or into the historical expressions of religious earnestness, can the high place of feeling in the religious life be rightly depreciated? Feeling is the play of our consciousness coming into contact with its object. It varies in intensity according to the interest we take in that object. It is a totally different thing in the sense of a casual acquaintance and of a near relative. When then the soul is in intimate contact with the object of objects, with God, feeling, the purest and the most intense, is not merely legitimate, but ordinarily inevitable. How much of the Psalter is feeling, the tenderest, the strongest, the most loyal, the most affectionate? Like as the hart desireth the water brooks, so longeth my soul after thee, O God. My soul is athirst for God, yea, even for the living God. When shall I come to appear before the presence of God? Whom have I in heaven but thee? And there is none upon earth that I desire in comparison of thee. My soul hangeth upon thee, thy right hand hath upholden me. Do not I hate them, O Lord, that hate thee? And am not I grieved with those that rise up against thee? Yea, I hate them right sore, even as though they were mine enemies. How profoundly is the religion of St. Paul, as we study it in his epistles, penetrated by feeling. Always in felt contact with an unseen master. He is tender, he is vehement, he burns, he is melted. His dispositions towards his fellow men are so various and keen, because in him feeling has been educated in a higher presence. The love of Christ constraineth us. To me, to live is Christ. Who shall separate us from the love of Christ? I live, yet not I, but Christ liveth in me. If any man love not the Lord Jesus Christ, let him be anathema. Maranatha. But the question is not whether feeling be an element of sincere religion, but whether it be the one most essential element. And here two observations cannot fail to strike us. In the long run, there can be, for well-ordered minds, no strong play of feeling apart from a sense of the intellectual truth of the object upon which feeling is bestowed. To lavish feeling, if it be possible to do so, upon a personage who is even suspected of being mythical or half-mythical, is to prostitute feeling. Some idea, then, of the object of feeling must precede the feeling, as well as a conviction of the truth of the object so conceived of. We are told that religious feeling is especially the sense of entire dependence upon a higher power. Man's inmost soul hangs confidingly upon the power in which we live and move and have our being. But then, what is this power? That is a question which must be answered before feeling can determine its complexion. Is this power an impersonal force? Is it a blind fate or destiny? Is it some vast machine having neither heart nor will, but moving onwards through endless cycles of destructions and recombinations, of life and death, unceasingly, resistlessly, inexorably? If so, feeling at least cannot take the form of absolute dependence. There is no such thing as surrendering yourself in trustful resignation to a piece of machinery which may crush you to death at any moment in its advance. Trustful dependence is only possible when that on which we depend is seen to be a person, and a moral person. That is to say, holy, truthful, compassionate, just. But here we pass out of the region of feeling. It appears that before feeling can trust itself, something is wanted to guide and colour it. Knowledge is at least as essential to religion as feeling, and knowledge of the object of religion, expressed in clear and precise terms, is, after all, only another name for dogma. But moreover, feeling, even if intelligent, must accompany right moral effort in order to be religious. Feeling, even when directed to heavenly objects, may be in its substance partly physical, and there is no necessary connection between feeling so originating and moral earnestness, or even a right morality. Nay, it is very possible for those who feel warmly to imagine mistakenly enough that warm feeling is the same thing as, or an adequate substitute for, acting rightly. He who said, "If ye love me, keep my commandments," implied that there are forms of religious passion, distinct no doubt from the true Christian grace of love, which may coexist with disobedience and may even appear to compensate for it. The Galatians had not been the less willing to pluck out their own eyes out of devotion to St. Paul at the time of their conversion, because they afterwards looked on him as a personal enemy for telling them the truth about the Judaizers. The apostle was not insincere who protested, "Though I should die with thee, yet will I not deny thee," albeit a few hours later, at the crisis of danger, he could exclaim, "I know not the man." Feeling is not necessarily moral purpose, and its possible deficiencies on this side, as well as on the side of knowledge, show that we cannot regard it alone, as alone forming the raw material of religious life. Is it then more nearly true to say that the one essential thing in religion is knowledge of God and of the things of God? Somewhat of this kind was the opinion of the Gnostics of the 2nd century. They regarded the Christian doctrines as simply an addition to the existing stock of current human speculations, and they ventilated what appeared to us nothing less than the wildest fancies under the protection of current Christian phrases. which served to decorate and recommend speculations that often had nothing to do with Christianity. They thought that the apostles had been unintellectual persons upon whose well-meant efforts they had themselves improved. Since faith has in it a large moral element, their watchword was not faith but knowledge, and in their own phrase, this knowledge was to be the salvation of souls. The history of the human mind repeats itself, and a position which is at bottom akin to the foregoing is familiar to some of us in the philosophies of Schelling and Hegel. Here too, faith is only the lower grade, the popular form of the religious consciousness. Its most cherished doctrines are only parables of the realities open to the eye of science, upon which the modern thinker may gaze. His religion is thus mainly an effort of the intellect, which is perpetually engaged in disentangling and distilling from the rude forms of old world creeds those abstract scientific conceptions which are better suited to the palate of modern philosophy. It has already been implied that knowledge, true knowledge of truth, is of vital importance to religion. No one would question this except in the interests of a morbid fanaticism. Religion is impossible without some knowledge of its object, and our capacities for true religious life must, to a certain extent, vary with our varying degrees of religious knowledge. This, says our Saviour, is life eternal, that they may know thee, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom thou hast sent. The knowledge spoken of here and elsewhere in the Bible is indeed not merely intellectual. It is knowledge in act. It is the knowledge which is won by love and obedience, as distinct from, although altogether with, intelligence. Nevertheless, knowledge, in its ordinary sense of information apprehended by the understanding, is indispensable to religion. Sight is not the power of walking or working, but we cannot work or walk blindfolded without disaster. Yet no mere action of the intelligence, however active upon the subject matter of religion, is the true backbone of religion. Knowledge alone may only enhance responsibility. If Christ had not come and spoken to the Jews, they had not had sin. As it was, they had no cloak for their sin. St. Paul contrasts a merely intelligent apprehension of religious subjects with love. Knowledge, he says, puffeth up, but charity edifieth. The whole drift of St. James's epistle is to show the worthlessness, religiously speaking, of unfruitful knowledge. The hearer of the word who is not a doer is compared with the man who continueth in the perfect law of liberty besides looking into it. The first does but realize a fleeting and unproductive impression. The second has undergone a change of life. The most intellectual of the Greeks, whose thoughts about God and the soul might at times seem almost to anticipate Christianity, as they have been welcomed with the respect of many a generation of Christians, has unwittingly warned us of the religious impotence of mere culture by staining his pages, not once or twice, but habitually, with sympathetic references to crimes, tolerable enough to the public sentiment of Athens, but the very names of which are defiling to Christian lips. The most intellectual Gnostics were sensualists, sensualists upon a theory and with deliberation. And modern history, if it were worth our while to consult it here, yields many a warning that intellectual culture about religious things is one thing, and genuine religion quite another. Henry VIII, who had been destined for the English primacy, was among the best-read theologians of his day, but whatever opinion may be entertained of his place as a far-sighted statesman in English history, no one would seriously speak of him as personally religious. Intelligence, indeed, however cultivated, is only a department of human life. Man is something greater than a cultivated intellect, even than an intellect cultivated by study of the highest objects that can be presented to it, by study of the things of God. More than this is needed to constitute religion, which, if it be not merely a sentiment or passion, so certainly it is more than an intellectual effort, however serious be its purpose or sublime its goal. Are we then to say with a large section of the modern world that the essential thing in religion is morality? This was the teaching of Immanuel Kant. Religion, as he phrases it, is a practical recognition of the divine origin of the moral law. And it is a doctrine which constantly meets us in the society and the general literature of our own country at the present day. Its popularity is easy of explanation in an age when belief in the unseen has been seriously weakened among those classes of the people to which the political necessity of strengthening virtues which purify life and uphold society is preeminently obvious. And certainly we must admit that religion has no more appropriate work than the regulation of human life in accordance with moral truth. And it is in this province especially that we look for evidences of its reality and its power. By their fruits ye shall know them, said its one great master of certain religious aspirants. Pure religion, according to his apostle, and undefiled before God and the Father is this, to visit the fatherless and widows in their affliction, and to keep himself unspotted from the world. In other words, it is active philanthropy and personal purity. The language used to describe it in the Bible implies that knowledge of religion and religious emotion are, as we have seen, worse than incomplete if they do not lead to active goodness. What a man knows or feels is of little import until it is ascertained what he does, or rather what he is. But it by no means follows that morality can be truly described as the essence of religion. It differs from religion in this, that morality is conformity to a law of right, while religion is essentially a relation towards a person. A perfect, absolute morality will cover the same practical ground as true religion. But if men endeavour to treat morality as the only essential element in religion, and accordingly attempt to plant it on some independent basis, physical or otherwise, of its own, two things will happen. Such a morality will be much narrower than a religious morality. It will, in the judgment of religious men, present an incomplete view of the real cycle of duty. Notably, it will fail to recognize that most important side of duty which we owe exclusively to God. But besides this, morality divorced from religion will tend more and more from the nature of the case to approximate to a department of mere human law, to concern itself only with acts and not with motives, to make the external product and not the internal governing principle the supreme consideration. Morality severed from religious motive is like a branch cut off from a tree. It may, here and there, from accidental causes, retain its greenness for a while, but its chance of vigorous life is a very slender one. Nor is it possible to popularize a real morality, a morality that shall deal with motives as well as with acts, without unveiling to the eye of the soul something more personal than an abstract law. It is when man has caught sight of the one perfect being, and in the effort to escape from the weakness and degradations of his own earthly life, lifts up his soul to this unseen, all-powerful, all-bountiful friend, that he may hope to discover the true ideal of his life and to realize it. Religion is thus the constant spring and the best guarantee of morality. But morality is not the essence of religion. Religion consists fundamentally in the practical recognition of a constraining bond between the inward life of man and an unseen person. The ancients were fond of discussing the derivation of the word religion, and Cicero refers to it to that anxious habit of mind which cons over again and again all that bears on the service of heaven. Lactantius may be wrong in his etymology, but he has certainly seized the broad popular sense of the word when he connects it with the idea of an obligation by which a man is bound to an invisible Lord. With this, the biblical phraseology is in substantial harmony. The expressions which describe the religion of the earliest patriarchs are in point. And like much else in the Pentateuch, they mold the later language of the Psalter. Enoch and Noah are said to have walked with God. Abraham was bidden, walk before the face of God and be perfect. Here God is represented as the bounden companion of a man's life, as well as his all-surveying judge and master. And this idea of religion as personal devotedness to God underlies all the representations of Scripture on the subject. Religion, in the understanding, is the knowledge of God, of his will and commandments. It is the knowledge of his mystery or secret counsel revealed in Christ. When the Jewish law had been given, religion was practically a walking in the law of the Lord. When the Christian revelation has been made, it is an acknowledgement of the truth which is after godliness. But in this truth, in that law, it seeks a person. It is fundamentally the maintenance of a real relation with the personal God, or with a divine person really incarnate in Jesus Christ. Accordingly, religion, both Jewish and Christian, is described as a covenant. It is a bond or understanding between the nation or the soul and God. Or still more, from the point of view of a faith that worketh by love, it is personal communion with God. That which we have seen and heard, says St. John, declare we unto you, that ye also may have communion with us. And truly our communion is with the Father and with his Son, Jesus Christ. Thus, religious life is more than feeling, since feeling may be physical, misdirected, selfish. It is more than knowledge which, even if it be complete and accurate, may fail to govern the moral nature. It is more than obedience to a moral code, because such obedience, if sufficiently complete to be religious, already implies relations to the lawgiver. And yet religion is feeling, it is mental illumination, it is especially moral effort. Because it is that which implies and comprehends and combines them all. It is the sacred bond, freely accepted, generously, enthusiastically, persistently welcomed, whereby the soul engages to make a continuous expenditure of its highest powers in attaching itself to the personal source and object of its being. It is the tie by which the soul binds itself to God, its true friend. To be thus bound to a person is to cherish strong, nay, passionate feelings towards him. It is to seek to know all that can be known about his wishes and character. and to register this knowledge in exact terms, it is to obey scrupulously all that is clearly ascertained to be his will. Show thou me the way that I should walk in, for I lift up my soul unto thee. This is the language of feeling, pure and strong. It is the language of intelligence, ever desiring a higher knowledge of its highest object. It is the language of obedience, the most absolute that man can proffer. It is these because it is the voice, the exceeding great cry of that unquenchable passion, of that irrepressible aspiration, whereby the soul of man shows forth its truest dignity and highest virtue in seeking the better to know and love and serve its highest and invisible object. Because, in a word, it is the language of religion. If the prayer of the human soul be granted, can we infer from the needs of the suppliant any of the necessary characteristics of the great gift which is to relieve them? To say that we can do so will not be dictating terms to God, because he is not more the author of a religious revelation than of the moral and mental instincts which demand it. To say that we can do so will not involve our paying court to the corrupt instincts of a fallen nature, because it certainly is not these instincts which seek a close approach to a nearer vision of the throne of moral purity and light. Nor will it compromise the true faith by drawing attention to some features which are, and must be, more or less common to it, with the false faiths whereby man again and again, during his long and weary history, has sought to satisfy the noblest of his passions, even when he has only lighted up the dark canopy of heaven from fires kindled by himself on earth. For in order to exist at all, false beliefs must embody some, even considerable elements of truth. And conversely, the true faith, in order to be itself, must have something both in its form and in its substance that is common to itself and to every falsehood that opposes it. First of all, then, an answer from God to the religious needs of man will be, at least in some degree, a mysterious answer. It will half unveil much which shades off into the unknown and the incomprehensible. To profess to reveal the infinite, and yet to undertake to explain everything to the perfect satisfaction of a finite understanding, is worse than unreasonable. And a creed which should discover nothing that lies beyond the province of our experience can have no pretensions to be a religious creed at all. For religion is not a relation to our communion with nature or with any natural force or law. It is communion with an invisible person. Certainly we hear men speak of a religion of art, of a religion of work, of a religion of civilization. Harmless metaphors these, if it can be only meant that all the occupations of life can and should be penetrated and sanctified by the sense of God's presence and will, but mischievous and misleading to the last degree if it be suggested that either art or work or civilization is in itself an end worthy of the highest energies of the human spirit. He only who made us for himself, the infinite and eternal God, can be the object of religion, and any serious answer to the religious aspirations of humanity must point to him. Our preachers, said a German writer, referring to his university some 30 years ago, having got rid of the Christian doctrines by means of the higher criticism, are now insisting with much earnestness upon the importance of taking regular exercise. Regular exercise is no doubt a matter of real importance in its way. but an advocacy of its advantages, however impassioned, says nothing to that side of our being which breathes the prayer, "Show thou me the way that I should walk in, for I lift up my soul unto thee." That Christianity is mysterious is no new objection against it. Unquestionably it is mysterious. In the year 1702, Toland undertook to prove that Christianity is not mysterious. But he only succeeded in leading a certain number of minds to a belief that it is false. That the gospel contains nothing contrary to reason is a conviction of every Christian who knows that right reason and revelation are alike gifts of God. That the gospel contains nothing above reason is an assertion so paradoxical as to be undeserving of a reply from those who believe that the historical and doctrinal statements of the New Testament are integral elements of the gospel. Toland indeed could only make any approach to demonstrating his thesis by tampering with the ordinary and worldwide sense of the term mystery. And since the days of Toland, science herself has, by her discoveries, made men feel more keenly than did our fathers the mysteriousness of nature, and through nature of nature's God. Next, God's answer to man's prayer must, at least within limits, be definite. An answer made up altogether of vague hopes, aspirations, surmisings, guesses, probabilities, whatever its other merits, will not meet the specific needs of man. What does man seek in seeking a religious creed? He seeks intellectual satisfaction and moral support. His intellect asks for reliable information upon certain subjects of the most momentous importance. How does he come to be here? Whither is he going? What is the purpose and drift of the various forms of existence around him? Above all, what is in nature, what are the attributes and dispositions of that being to whom the highest yearnings of his inmost self constantly point as the true object of his existence? In asking that the answers to these questions shall be definite, that what is certain shall be affirmed as certain, what is doubtful as doubtful, what is false as false, he is only asking that his religious information shall be presented in as clear and practical a shape as his information on other subjects. In no department of human knowledge is haziness deemed a merit. By nothing is an educated mind more distinguished than by the resolute effort to mark the exact frontiers of its knowledge and its ignorance, to hesitate only when hesitation is necessary, to despair of knowledge only when knowledge is ascertainably out of reach. Surely on the highest and most momentous of all subjects, this same precision may be asked for with reverence and in reason. Surely the human mind is not bound to forget its noblest instincts when it approaches the throne and presence of its Maker. Yet more necessary are definite statements of truth and duty to the moral side of human life. To obey at all, we must know what are the true limits of obedience and what the nature and authority of the lawgiver. A soldier under fire has two things to do. First, to attend to the word of his commanding officer, and then to strengthen his will by all the considerations which may enable him to do his duty. Man as a moral being is engaged in a perpetual campaign against the invading forces of temptation which assail him from without, and the insurrectionary outbreaks of lawless passions from within. If he is to make a successful resistance, he must be penetrated by a conviction that it is of vital importance to resist to the last extremity. This conviction must itself be made up of and depend upon other convictions, such as the sanctity of God, his power, his omnipresence, the interest which he takes in our success, the strength with which he supplies us, the certainty that he will come to judge us. A hazy sketch, a faltering utterance, may suffice for an aimless sentimentalism. It is useless for the purposes of an earnest moral struggle. An exact creed and code of conduct is therefore a need of man's mental and moral nature, and all religious systems, whatever their truth or falsehood, have attempted to satisfy it. To answer to this need with which we are familiar, the answer to this need with which we are familiar is that contained in the Christian theology, and we use that word in its broad sense as including the whole cycle of revealed doctrine and morals. Theology, in its scientific exhibition, results from the effort which the Christian mind makes from age to age to reduce to a precise and working form the deposit of truth committed at the first to the Christian Church. It is the elaborate inventory which century after century the Church has been taking of the priceless treasures which were committed to her keeping in the age of the Apostles. What doctrines may and may not be catalogued in that inventory without serious inaccuracy is a point upon which, unhappily, there are wide divisions in the Christian world. But in the 50 generations of Christians, from the first until the present age, there has never been any sort of question as to the duty of ascertaining, as correctly as may be, what are the truths which Christ and his apostles have taught? What is the exact area and import of these truths? What their moral and social significance? What are practical duties towards them? Yes, but it is said, has not this inveterate instinct of the Christian mind been fatal to the beauty of religious truth? Is not religious truth better left in the vague, hazy distance of popular thought? Is it not vulgarized by this nearer probing, by this inquisitive anxiety to make out exactly what it is? Is not the New Testament vague and undecided? And are we likely to improve upon it? Are not the clergy too under a temptation to confuse between their professional instinct of making the most of their title deeds and the real broad interests of Christendom? Has not Christendom, in fact, suffered by over-definitions, by false definitions, and this in former ages as certainly as in our own? Certainly there are arguments which may be urged against definitions, and first of all on aesthetic grounds. A picture of Turner's is a more beautiful thing than a working drawing. But if your object be to give the measurements of a public edifice, Turner's picture would not be the more useful guide of the two. It is easy to advise a man to study and admire the poetry of Isaiah and St. John without troubling himself with the truth of their theological dogmas or even of their historical statements. No doubt the poetry of the evangelist and of the prophet is of consummate beauty, but it is not their poetry which has impressed them on the thought and heart of the Christian world. The really important question about both these writers is, what do they exactly teach upon the gravest subjects that can interest thoughtful men? And next, is their teaching true? The answer to this, to be worth having, must be a sharply defined answer, and art, if needs be, must make a sacrifice to the demands of truth. That there have been unnecessary definitions, rash definitions, false definitions in Christendom must be frankly granted. That they are still possible cannot be denied in view of contemporary events. That they have injured the cause of Christ cannot be doubted. But the question is as to the principle of definiteness, not as to its abuse. False definitions, like false miracles, imply the true, of which they are a counterfeit and caricature. As to the New Testament, those who speak of its teaching as indefinite appear to confuse between its substance and its form. Made up as it is of 4 biographical sketches, of 1 narrative of the lives and works of some missionary teachers, and 21 letters, 6 of them addressed to individuals, and of 1 description of a heavenly vision, its form is of necessity unmethodical. It is, if you will, anti-scholastic, but its form is distinct from its substance, and from age to age the clear import of its substance is pressed upon the imagination and heart of the world by the matchless beauties of its form. The teaching of the New Testament indefinite? It is simple paradox. What can be more definite than the account of Christ's birth, of his miracles, of his resurrection, of his ascension into heaven in the first 3 Gospels? What more definite than the awful representation of his person in the 4th? Is the account of justification in the Epistle to the Romans and the Galatians indefinite? Or that of the Eucharist and the supernatural gifts of the Spirit in the first Epistle to the Corinthians? Or that of the incorporation of the Church with the living and triumphant Christ in the letters to the Colossians and Ephesians? Or that of its organization in the pastoral epistles? Is it not rather true that the New Testament is much too definite for modern unbelief, and that the real crime of the Church is not that she has added the quality of definiteness to the writings of the apostles and the evangelists, but that she has persistently called attention to that quality which from the first and from the nature of the case belonged to them? How indeed could it be otherwise? How would the cry of humanity for light and guidance have been answered? How would it not rather have been mocked and scorned by a revelation of the indefinite, by a revelation of mists, whereof none could decide the frontiers, or unfold the meaning, or insist upon the worth? Such a revelation would have in fact revealed nothing, nothing that might not have been in some degree surmised by reason, nothing that could invigorate the heart or control the will. And in Christianity, God has not thus disappointed us. He has not contrived to say much without asserting anything. If our Heavenly Father has not answered the petition of his children for the solid bread of truth with a stone, he has as certainly not met it by offering them a transcendental vapor. Thirdly, a real answer to the religious needs of man must be positive. It must state what is truth and not merely what is not truth. The soul of man does not look inward and upward only in the hope of detecting falsehoods. Its deepest desire is to know not what is not, but what is. Merely negative teachers are as the wind. They destroy, but they cannot build. At their best, they do but sweep away the unsubstantial fictions of human fancy or human fraud, but they erect nothing solid in the place of the discarded fictions. Positive truth alone can feed, sustain, invigorate the soul. It is no support in the hour of despondency or in the hour of temptation to reflect or to be told that such and such a doctrine or system is false. Possibly enough it is false, but what then? Does a sense of its falsehood nerve the will to do and the heart to sustain when action and endurance are hard. A sense of falsehood only supplies moral power so long and so far as you are confronted with the falsehood. You hate the lie, and your hatred imports force into your contradiction. You loathe the idol, and a righteous scorn nerves your arm to shatter it. But when the idol has been pulverized and the lie has exploded, your force is gone. Your force was purely relative to the objects of its animosity, and it perished with them. Nay more, even while they lasted, your force was good for nothing beyond and beside the function of destroying them. Such force is like Jehu. It is transient energy so long as vengeance has to be wreaked upon the house of Ahab. But it is abject impotence when the time comes for settling the polity of Israel on a sure foundation, so as to store up a legacy of strength and safety for the coming times. Positive doctrine, on the other hand, is or ought to be moral power. The whisper, "There is no God," in the heart of the moral fool can never add to his stock of practical force. The faith of the psalmist, "The Lord liveth," is at once followed by the exclamation, "And blessed be my strong helper, and praised be the God of my salvation." The soul cannot rest upon the void which is the result of that vast negation. It can and does draw comfort, strength, support, determination, as it grasps and leans upon this greatest of all assertions. This is a point which requires insisting on, especially in an age of criticism. Here and there, criticism may vindicate an affirmation. Its more ordinary occupation is to destroy. It almost proceeds upon the assumption that the soil of truth is encumbered on all sides with brushwood and rubbish, and that it can scarcely do wrong in burning and clearing away forever. We may allow that there is legitimate and useful work for it to do, but it is not the less true that the temper of mind which it creates is prone to entertain a most serious misapprehension on religious matters. It tends to beget the notion that religious truth is simply negation, negation of false beliefs, negation of superstitious practices, negation of the errors and mistakes of other people, but scarcely anything that is really positive, with a body and substance of its own. Very many people in this country, especially among the educated classes, conceive of religion in this way, and to their own unspeakable loss. What God is not, what Christ is not, what the atonement and work of Christ are not, what prayer is not, what sacraments are not, these are the questions with which they concern themselves almost exclusively. Yet the only question that is lastingly practical is what God, Christ, the atonement, prayer, the sacraments are. The negative conclusion does nothing beyond removing one or more misconceptions, or being supposed to do so. Or rather, it does something which were better undone. It satisfies the vague sense that religion is too important a concern to be entirely passed by. It furnishes a form of interest in religion, of strictly intellectual interest, that may be warranted to entail no practical consequences, and thus the half-awakened conscience is again lulled to sleep by encountering a religious idea which only presents itself to be discarded, and the eyes of the spirit close, perhaps forever. Do I say that a true faith has no negative aspects? Certainly not. The Jewish faith was a negation of polytheism. Christianity is a negation of polytheism and of much besides. The most characteristic writings of the great apostles are protests against false ideas of the work of Christ. The most elaborate of the Catholic creeds contains a repudiation of errors which deny the truth of the divine nature or the truth of the person of Jesus. But in these cases, the negation does not stand alone. It is only the inevitable corollary of a greater affirmation. Unlike the dreary criticism, which makes a solitude in the human spirit and then sardonically calls it peace, the negations of the Creed do but remove obstructions to its positive statements. They clear a space in thought for laying the foundations and raising the walls of a solid edifice, within which the divine architect has provided for the most urgent wants of man. Yet again, if man's deepest needs are to be satisfied, he must believe that his creed is absolutely and not merely relatively true. Relative truth, truth which is true only to certain persons or under certain circumstances, ceases to be truth when those persons and circumstances pass. It is transient. And to say that truth is transient is to qualify the idea of truth by an attribute which destroys it. Relative truth is not truth in the plain sense of the term. It is only opinion. It is opinion which, in the event, proves to be unfounded. We are often told that Christianity, like the other positive religions of the world, is relatively true, and hard words are used of Christians who say that its truth is absolute, if it be true at all. Yet how can a creed profess to be relatively true without admitting itself to be really false? It was pardonable in Ben-Hadad's Syrians to suggest that the God of Israel was only a God of the hills, but no believing Israelite could have granted this without denying the first article of his creed. And philosophy has sometimes meant to befriend Christianity by asserting that it teaches a relative truth. She bids believers make the best of it, on the ground that, if not absolutely true, it is a phase of truth, true to the believer, true provisionally, although liable to be superseded by a higher truth in days to come. But who could make the most of a creed with such an estimate of its worth as this? Would any sensible man die for a relatively true religion? Could it teach him the duties of prayer or self-sacrifice? Would he live for it? Would he be even interested for long in a philosophy which he believed to be only relatively true? While the Ptolemaic system of the heavens lasted, it was supposed to be absolutely true. Would the ancient world have listened quietly to the Ptolemaic teachers had it suspected, however distantly, the advent of a Copernicus? The ceremonial element in the Jewish dispensation, as St. Paul has taught us, was only of relative authority, but it was believed by the Jews to be absolute. To see in it a figure of the time then present was already to have become a Christian. Any creed, whether true or false, must claim to be absolute, or it must make no claim at all, since upon our faith in its absolute truth depends our persuasion of the necessity and even of the reasonableness of the acts, habits, efforts, sacrifices which constitute its practical side, of the ventures, in short, which men make on account of it. To say that Christianity is only relatively true, that it is but the prelude and introduction of some broader religion of humanity which will in time supersede it, is in fact to reject Christianity. For from the first, Christianity has claimed to be the universal religion. It was destined from the first to embrace the whole world. It was to last throughout the ages. Go ye, said its founder, and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. And lo, I am with you always, even unto the end of the world. In this claim of universality, whether in time or range of empire, there lay the implied and further claim to be the absolute religion, the one final unveiling of the universal Father's mind before the eyes of his children. This conviction underlies St. Paul's earnest apostolate of the Gentiles in the face of active Jewish prejudice. He owed the absolute religion, as he could have owed no relative religion whatever, to the Greeks and to the barbarians alike, to the philosophers and to the uneducated. To his eye, all the deepest divisions of country, race, and station vanished entirely as men passed within the church. There is, he exclaimed, neither Greek nor Jew, circumcision nor uncircumcision, barbarian, Scythian, bond nor free, but Christ is all, and in all. A religion conscious of being suitable only to particular dates or localities could never have originally aspired to bring within the range of its influence all the varieties of race and thought that are found in the human family. It would feel its unsuitableness to some races, to some civilizations, to some historical periods, if not to all. To make all men see what is the fellowship of the mystery, which from the beginning of the world hath been hid in God, was an ambition appropriate to the faith once for all delivered to the saints. Lastly, if man's religious wants are to be answered, his creed must speak not merely to his intelligence, but to his heart and will. He cannot really rest upon the most unimpeachable abstraction. He needs something warmer than the truest philosophy. He yearns to come in contact with a heart, and no religion therefore can really satisfy him which does not at least lead him to know and love a person, an unseen friend who will purify and teach and check and lead and sustain him. That is his greatest necessity. And this want, this last but deepest want of man's religious life, Christianity has satisfied. As humanity, sitting in darkness and in the shadow of death, pleads with the power whom it feels but cannot see, show thou me the way that I should walk in, for I lift up my soul unto thee. Lo, the heavens drop down from above, and the skies pour forth righteousness. And one fairer than the children of men presents himself to all the centuries and countries of the world with the gracious bidding, Come unto me, all ye that labour and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. In the lectures which are to follow during the succeeding Sundays of Lent, an attempt will be made to insist upon some of the truths which are most fundamentally related to the soul's religious life, as they come into contact with some forms of modern thought. Of so vast a subject, a few fragments are all that, from the nature of the case, can possibly be offered. If we could say all that could be said, such truths must still shade off into the unknown, but we may at least endeavour to trace what we can see of their real outline, to quicken our sense of their positive contents, to deepen our convictions of their absolute and unchanging significance, to enhance the influence which they already exert over our moral natures. It is not well that such topics should be approached with no higher purpose than that of an intellectual enterprise. If we do not mean the cry, Show thou me the way that I should walk in, for I lift up my soul unto thee, it were better not to enter on the holy ground. Religion indeed must always command the attention of practical men, because it is, at least, one of the most powerful forces, because it shapes the strongest passions that can govern the conduct of large masses of mankind. It also will ever be interesting to serious thinkers whether they accept its authority or not. For without controversy, it has a word to say upon the highest objects of human thought. But for those who look at it not only from without but from within, not as a toy of the intellect, but as a necessity of the soul, it must be something more than this. If there be any truth in its teachings at all, if its aspirations be anything more than a waste of heart and effort, lavished through centuries upon what are after all only weird or graceful phantoms of the brain, then nothing that can occupy our thoughts can really compare with it in point of absorbing and momentous import. Beyond everything else, it must have imperious claims upon the time and thought and working power of every human being who has ever felt in any serious degree the unspeakable solemnity of life and death. May God endow us with a sense of this interest in that which binds us to himself, or may he deepen it, and then in answer to the longings which in every sincere soul it will assuredly foster, may he this Lent be merciful to us, each and all, and bless us, and show us the light of his countenance, and be merciful unto us.